On today's podcast, we speak about opiates, book recommendations, and how to improve your fluency in English. Welcome to
Aprender Inglés con Reza y Craig.
Hi, I'm Reza.
And my name's Craig.
And with nearly 50 years of teaching between us, we'll help you improve your English and take it to the next level. How are things going, Craig?
Things are good, Reza. I'm very busy. We're recording this episode in June 2021. June and July, typically a busy time for teachers with exams. I'm doing some Cambridge oral exams, some speaking exams. Are you busy?
Yes, I've got a few things to do to finish off the year, as you say, exams, writing corrections and that type of thing. But I see that the end is in sight.
We can see the light at the end of the tunnel.
Exactly. That means you've got to suffer a little bit now, but very soon you'll be free to do what you like.
First this week, we have a message from Alejandro from Colombia.
Hello Reza, hello Craig. It's Alejandro from Medellin, Colombia. I've been listening to your podcast for about 6 months. I've had the opportunity to hear my voice. It produces a weird sensation because the intonation is different than we think. I'm working in a cancer clinic as an anesthesiologist with a fellowship in pain. It is common that in my job, many patients take opiates without needing them. And that is the reason to propose to you a topic for a future podcast, the opiates between young people or the misuse for opioids. I know for my job that thousands of Americans die each year directly or indirectly associated with opioids. Thank you guys for inspire us to improve our English and for your continued effort to non-English speakers reach the next level. Have a nice week.
Thank you very much for your message, Alejandro. And your pronunciation was generally very, very good, and you were almost perfect with your grammar and vocabulary as well. What do you think, Craig?
Yes, thank you very much, Alejandro. It was a very interesting message. There's one thing, though, that I needed to check, because you said that you are doing or have done a fellowship in pain. And I was curious about the word fellowship. I would use in that situation a speciality, for example, because fellowship is kind of like a grant, which in Spanish would be una beca. So that sentence I would rephrase, Alejandro, and I would say I'm specializing in pain management, or maybe I'm specializing in pain control. Or to use the noun, I have a speciality in pain control or pain management.
And you said, Alejandro, quite correctly, that you're an anesthesiologist. Not an easy word to say. Anesthesiologist. You know what? I had never heard that word before. But as soon as I heard it, I understood it. This happens when you hear new words in your native language, and I'm sure it's the correct word. However, it's much more common amongst non-specialists, people who are not doctors, to talk about anesthetist, which is also very difficult to say. So, anesthesiologist or anesthetist.
Another small point from your message, Alejandro, you said, I want to propose to you a topic. When you propose to someone, so if you have proposed to and then the person, that often means that you are asking them to marry you. You're proposing marriage. I proposed to my wife 10 years ago, for example. With a topic, it's better to say, I would like to propose a topic, or I would like to suggest a topic. So be careful what you're proposing. You're proposing a topic. You're not proposing to someone, because that is offering to marry them.
One more little thing. We understood you when you said, thank you for inspire us to improve our English. I think that's what you said. But the word for is a preposition. And if you use a verb after a preposition, it has to be with ing. So you need to say, thank you for inspiring us to improve our English.
So Alejandro, you are working and you have a speciality in anesthesia. The noun of anesthesia is anesthetic. So an anesthetic, which means to numb the pain. And you specifically spoke about opiates. What are opiates? Well, according to the dictionary, opiates are natural or synthetic drugs that have a morphine-like pharmacological action. So they're like morphine, they're similar to morphine. And in that description, I said opiates are natural or synthetic drugs. According to some research that we've just done, opiates tend to be natural, whereas opioids can be part synthetic. So there's a difference according to what we've just checked on the internet between opiates and opioids.
Yeah, when we say opiates are natural, we mean they come from natural ingredients. Then maybe those ingredients are mixed up in a strange way, but the ingredients come from nature, whereas opioids are synthetically manufactured in a laboratory to give the same effect. And Craig, why do people use opiates or opioids?
Because they're in pain, because they're a very good pain relief solution. In fact, I don't know if all opiates come from the poppy. Poppy, if you're a Spanish speaker, is amapola. But I think many opiates do come from poppies, from the flowers. And it will be very interesting to see the effect of American troops that have recently, this year in 2021, left Afghanistan or are in the process of leaving Afghanistan, if that's going to affect the availability of opiates, because they've been there for 20 years. And I wonder if that's going to change anything, because Afghanistan is the world's leader in poppy production.
You know what happened to me once? This will probably amuse Alejandro, but I'll never forget the first time, one of the very few times in my life, that I've taken opiates, a very small quantity, accidentally. Or, no, not accidentally, but I didn't realize I was doing it. Let me explain my little anecdote. I arrived as a student teacher along with my colleagues to teach as student teachers in Hungary, that country in Central Europe. And they'd prepared a typical welcome meal for us of Hungarian food, which is very good, by the way. If you're not familiar with Hungarian cuisine, do try it. Fantastic. And I particularly recommend their desserts. Hungarian desserts are superb. They're really, really good. Anyway, let me get to the point. We all enjoyed our desserts, and all of us, an hour or two later, were incredibly sleepy. Not just me, but all of us were really, really sleepy.
Why was that?
Well, we were only like in our early 20s, so we shouldn't have been so sleepy, because they'd given us poppy seed pie, a typical Hungarian dish. Poppy seeds, made out of poppy seeds, full of poppy seeds. And it made us all really, really sleepy. We'd effectively eaten, I guess, opiates, small quantities, but enough to make us feel sleepy. We all felt sleepy. It was really curious.
So don't eat too many poppy seeds. That's the moral to that story. And Alejandro, we're not going to dedicate a complete episode on opiates because we don't want to put everybody to sleep. And as an anesthesiologist, you'll appreciate that.
Yeah, that's your job, Alejandro, to put people to sleep.
That's your job. But we have done an episode on drugs and addiction that you might find interesting. Go to inglespodcast.com/118, Alejandro. And if you haven't listened to that episode on drugs and addiction, we think you might like it.
We've got another voice message. This time it's from Maria from Tenerife, but she's living in Salamanca. Why? Because she has something in common with Alejandro. Let's listen to her message.
Hi, Greg and Reza. It's Maria. I'm from Tenerife, but I currently live in Salamanca. I've been here for 7 years while I was studying medicine, and now I'm aspiring to a job as a physician in Madrid. This job is quite unusual because I have to be the doctor for an American film production. I mean, it's not me acting as a doctor for a film, but I'm the doctor for the whole film crew. So I would like to ask you if you wouldn't mind talking about medical care vocabulary. I've always loved English. It's by far my favorite language, but due to medical studies and lack of time, I've lost fluency in speaking. And now I feel like life has given me one more opportunity to improve this language again. I wasn't looking for it, but a friend of mine recommended me for the job, and since then I feel like continuing to learn English, especially more focused on my field. Hoping to make up for time lost, I've been doing different courses, watching medical series in original version, looking for vocabulary videos on YouTube, and listening to podcasts in English. That's how I discovered you. Just coincidence, but what a nice coincidence. Listening to you both is a delight. I've always enjoyed speaking with an American accent, but I have to admit that British English is like music to my ears. I really appreciate your work. Thank you very much. You know, I may not get the job, but at least I have given my English a second chance.
Thank you, Maria, for your message. You said that you've lost some fluency. I'm wondering how fluent you were before you lost it, because that sounded to me incredibly fluent and incredibly well-spoken. So I don't know if you practiced that message a few times before you sent it, but it was at obviously a very, very high level. What's your opinion?
That's exactly what I thought. To think that your level was even higher than that before, well, you've reached an extremely high level of fluency and good pronunciation in English. Also, very good accuracy as well.
Yes. Yeah, and some lovely expressions you mixed in with your message, Maria. I'm aspiring to a job as a physician. I really liked that. To make up for time lost, I really like the way you inverted that, and you didn't say lost time, you said time lost. And finally, you said it towards the end. British English is like music to my ears. When you like something very much, you can say it's music to my ears. When Reza is cooking food for us or making a cake, I could say, oh, Reza, that's music to our ears. But is there anything, Reza, that we can help Maria to improve? There were one or two small things that we can work on.
Yes, the pronunciation of the word focus. Yeah, always a tricky word. Focus is pronounced focus.
And also spend some time, Maria, focusing on the ED pronunciation of verbs in the past, of regular verbs in the past. And one thing I heard was recommend. So recommended, when the verb ends in a D sound, you need to pronounce the ED as id. So recommended, suspended, etc. But very, very small things. In general, your English is at a very, very high level. We wish you all the best with this job. I think you should definitely go for it. It sounds incredibly interesting, and good luck with your work in the film industry if you get the job.
Oh, and in the meantime, I hope you enjoy yourself in Salamanca. Listeners who've been listening for a while will know that I lived there for a couple of years, and I have very, very fond means very pleasant memories of Salamanca. And I'm not surprised to hear you're there, because I know that there's an important faculty of medicine there. And I remember when I was a teacher there many years ago, I came across, that means that I met accidentally, a lot of medical students in Salamanca. So I hope you have a good time there. It's a beautiful city, and give my regards to the city.
And finally, Maria, before we move on to another message, we have done several episodes that you might find interesting if you haven't already listened to them. In episode 190 of this podcast, we spoke about pharmacies, drugstores, and vocabulary concerned with the chemists. So go to inglespodcast.com/190. Episode 126 was about alternative medicine. And episode 107 was about getting sick, going to the doctor and describing pain. So that also might be interesting for Alejandro. And of course, you can see links to all of those episodes in the show notes at inglespodcast.com/369 for this episode. Next, we have a message from Pedro from Spain.
Hello, folks. I'm Pedro from Spain. And well, my story with English is that I've been using it for remote working since, well, the beginning of 2019. And in general, I'm able to communicate pretty well with people during work meetings, but I struggle a lot to understand whatever they say when the work meeting is over and we start doing some informal speak. At that time, there are moments where I can barely understand anything. And well, I guess you have already talked about that, how to train your ear. But in any case, any additional piece of advice, or if you could point me to a podcast where you have already talked about that, that would be really, really welcome. On a side note, this podcast of you was recommended to me by a friend, and I've been listening to it for a lot of months now. I'm really considering becoming a Patreon, so keep it up, and bye-bye.
Well, thank you, Pedro, for your message. Yes, it's very common now, isn't it, for people to be working remotely and to be working at home. And we will point you to some other episodes in a minute that you can listen to help you with small talk and chatting to colleagues either before or after the meeting. But one thing that just occurred to me listening to your message is that, of course, when you meet people in person, you have to think on your feet and you have to immediately interact with small talk and answering and asking questions. But if you're remote, what I often do is to open a document on the computer, and why not write some basic small talk questions on your computer, on your phone, on your monitor, so that you have some questions ready to ask your colleagues. So at the end of the meeting, you can have some questions ready and ask them. Of course, you don't know how they're going to answer. You don't know what they're going to say in reply. Then you have to be creative, and that comes with practice. But you can prepare some questions just to have some small talk and have a chat, a friendly conversation after or before the meeting. And we have spoken about small talk before, Pedro. Go to inglespodcast.com/77. That episode speaks about small talk and how to start a conversation and make small talk in English and have an informal chat. Also, episode 312, more recently, we spoke about things beyond the English language, integrating into British culture and working abroad and chatting with your colleagues in the office or remotely. So episodes 312 and 77 may help you with that, and good luck.
One little thing before we move on. Pedro, I think you said formal speak. You were talking about formal, but not speak, because speak, of course, is a verb. So you need to say formal speaking or formal speech. And one other thing, you said podcast. You recommended this podcast of your, but you should say this podcast of yours, because something of plus a possessive pronoun, not adjective. Your is an adjective, like your book, your podcast, but yours is the pronoun which doesn't go with a noun. So podcast of yours, book of mine, house of theirs. So podcast of yours.
It's like they say in the mafia, don't they? A friend of mine or a friend of ours, is it? They say in the mafia.
Yeah.
If someone is protected by the mafia, yeah, he's a friend of ours. Also, Pedro, I'd be very interested to know how you are finding remote working. I've heard mixed opinions on people who have changed during the pandemic from working in an office to working, when you say in Spanish, teleworking, working at home, working remotely. How are you finding it? Is it better for you? Is it worse for you? And why? So I'd be interested to get some feedback from you on that. Next, we have a voice message from Estefania from Madrid.
Hello, Reza. Hello, Greg. My name is Estefania. I'm from Madrid. I ran into your podcast a month ago, more or less, when I was listening to an episode of Look English podcast, and it was a Greg's interview. I've been listening to Luke's podcast almost since 7 years, and now both of you are my favorites. At this moment, I'm doing an English classes in an academy running by an English teacher who is amazing. I would like to pass the Aptis Advanced exam in the near future. However, I still feel a little bit unconfident about my speaking and writing skills. Your podcast is helping me a lot, and I used to hear it as much as I can. I would like to ask you about book recommendations to people like me. At this time, I'm reading The Silence of the Girls, which is set on Troja's War. And I would like to read some actual books. Thank you a lot for your work in this podcast. I think it's very helpful for people who is learning English, and it's very, very funny and enjoyable.
Thank you very much, Estefania, for sending in your message. We really enjoyed listening to it, and it was very clear. We understood everything you said, and we've got some recommendations for your reading. But before that, I think we can help you with one or two small things to make your speaking even better, can't we, Reza?
Yes, you had very good pronunciation and fluency, but we could work a little bit on the grammar and vocabulary. You said that you ran into the podcast a month ago. Yeah, you might say that, to run into, but it's more typical to say to come across something. Yeah, you found it by chance. It's more typical to say run into a person more than a thing, although I have heard people say it, but it's more typical to say come across something.
You know, I ran into Jonathan the other day. I saw him in the centre of the city. I came across him by accident, so you'd run into a person. And don't confuse run into, which means meet by accident, with run over, which is hit someone with your car. Don't run over anybody, but you can run into them. Another thing, Estefania, you said in a near future. It's better to say in the near future. So use the article the. In the near future, I hope to pass the Aptis exam. In the near future, I hope to be earning more money, etc.
I think you said this sentence, Stefania. You said, I used to hear it as much as I can. I think you mean something else. I think you mean I usually, because you are still listening to it. You listen to the podcast regularly. So maybe you listened to it yesterday, maybe today, maybe you're going to listen to it tomorrow. So not used to, because used to is for things in the past. You need the adverb usually. And also you said hear, but hear is more like you hear something which you didn't plan. Like if a bomb explodes, you didn't plan it. You happened to be walking past. Well, I hope you didn't plan it. You happened to be walking past and you heard it. But to listen to something is you plan it in advance. So I'm going to turn on the radio. Turn on the radio? I'm going to log on to internet and listen to our podcast. So you're making an effort to do it. You're planning it. You're listening to it. So not hear, better listen to. So the full sentence should be, I usually listen to it as much as I can.
Just trying to think the last time I turned on the radio. It's been years. When was the last time you turned on a radio? Turn on the television?
Yeah, actually, not turn on the radio, but I do occasionally listen to the radio, but on the internet.
Exactly.
But, yeah.
So you're clicking on the app. You're not turning the radio on. That's going out of use. That's not used anymore.
Different thing, exactly. Yeah.
And Estefania, you said that you were reading or are reading at the moment The Silence of the Girls, which is based on the Iliad by Homer. That's Homer, the Greek writer, not Homer Simpson. That's a book that was written a long, long time ago. And I had to check because I hadn't heard that. It's the Iliad from a feminist viewpoint, and it's written by Pat Barker, if you're interested. And we will give you a couple of recommendations, but you said you're interested in some actual books. And I think you meant to say some current books, some books that are maybe more modern, that have been written or published recently. So if it's an actual book, what you're saying is it's a real book. It's not an imaginary book. Better to say, can you recommend some current books or some recent books or some modern day books, perhaps?
Yes, and you referred to what you called Troya's War. And I know what you mean, but in English we call that the Trojan War. So yes, Troy, Troy, is that ancient Greek place. And the adjective is Trojan. And you said it was set on the Trojan War. We would say set in or set during the Trojan War.
And because your book that you were reading or are reading at the moment has a feminist viewpoint, perhaps you'd be interested in feminist writers. Virginia Woolf, WOOLF, is a very famous writer who wrote from a feminine perspective. So anything by her would be good. She's not exactly a modern day author, but maybe more modern would be someone like Germaine Greer, Greer, and you could start with Female Eunuch by Germaine Greer, which when it was released really sent shockwaves through society. And these recommendations can be found, along with everything else, in the show notes for this episode at inglespodcast.com/369. We also gave some more general book recommendations back in episode 177. That episode was specifically about writing emails, but we did give quite a long list of books that you could read if you're learning English. So again, inglespodcast.com/177. What's next, Reza?
Next, we've got a voice message all the way from Honduras, from Dennis.
Hello, friends. This is Danny Guzman once again speaking to you. And I just heard the podcast where I sent you the voice message the last time. And you said that you don't hear any mistake. There's nothing to improve. But I really have something to improve. And is when in a conversation, when the people talking to me, I understand almost everything. But the problem is when I'm trying to talk to the other people, my minds go blank. So I don't know what to do. And I hope you can help me with this. And another thing that I want to tell you is that I just finished to listen all of your podcasts. And now I think I'm going to do a second round. And I will say thank you once again to you. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Dennis. It was really good to hear from you again. I remember when you sent your first message that was perfect. However, this time, not so perfect. There are one or two small things that we can help you with. The first thing was that you said, my minds go blank. A slight mistake there because you put the S on the noun and made the noun plural instead of putting the S on the verb. So instead of saying my minds go blank, because you only have one mind, you should say my mind goes blank. That's a lovely expression, to say my mind goes blank. I can't think of anything to say. My mind goes completely blank and I forget everything.
Yes, you've got to decide, Dennis, if it's a plural noun, so therefore the verb won't have an S. For example, the boys go, Or if it's a singular noun, the boy, and then the verb will have the third person singular s, goes. In other words, Dennis, you've got to, and forgive me for this, you've got to make up your mind.
Oh.
You've got to make up your mind before you form the sentence. So you should have said, my mind goes blank.
Another small thing, Dennis, which is a very common mistake. We hear this all the time, and it's with the verb listen. Listen has a dependent preposition in English very often, so we say listen to something. And you said listen all your podcasts. You should say listen to all of your podcasts. Congratulations. Well done. You've listened to all of the episodes, and you said now you're going to go back and listen again. There's an expression in English which is to be a glutton for punishment, which means you enjoy punishing yourself. You're going to have to listen to nearly 350 episodes of Reza and I speaking. So we sympathize, but we thank you for your dedication, and we really hope you're getting benefit from these podcasts.
But we're not going to stop correcting you just yet. And there's one more little thing. You said, I finished to listen to all your podcasts. Finished to? No, I finished listening. In fact, you said I finished to listen, but finish goes with ing. So your full sentence needs to be I finished listening to all your podcasts.
And you asked the question, Dennis, how to improve your fluency in English. And maybe if you've listened to all the episodes, you remember us mentioning these ideas and tips in the past. But something you can do, you can practice with friends in person. So I know sometimes in some countries there are restrictions on who you can meet with, but if you can meet face to face over a coffee, over a beer with some friends, you can practice English that way. Or you can do it online. You can join groups, you can start a group, or get your friends together and speak English.
Another good thing to do is to record your voice. Notice, pay attention to your fluency. Is it good? Are there lots of pauses? Is there a lot of hesitation? Are there certain structures, certain words, or certain patterns where you tend to lose fluency? Easier if you record your voice and listen to it, and you'll discover what tends to interrupt your fluency, and you know that you need to work on that.
And I mentioned before starting a conversation group or joining one. If you're not sure what to speak about, go to episode 362, because in that episode we gave you some ideas for fluency practice exercises and activities, things you can do in English that are quite fun, and you can practice your English in a group, either in person or online.
Another thing, of course, you could do, Dennis, is get a private teacher. So somebody who's a professional, who knows what they're doing, and they will be closely paying attention to your fluency, and they will help you improve your confidence. They will correct your mistakes. You will notice you get better, and that in itself will probably improve your fluency when you've simply got more to say and you know that you're speaking more correctly. You tend to be more fluent.
So the secret really, Dennis, is practice. You have to practice as much as possible and for as long as you possibly can. And even with your family. I mean, they speak Spanish if you live in Honduras probably, but why not speak to them in English and then they'll answer you in Spanish? At least you're practicing your English every day. But maybe the most immediate thing you can do right now to practice your English and your fluency is send us a voice message. How can you do that? Well, go to speakpipe.com. That's speakpipe.com/English podcast. And of course, there's a link in the show notes and on our website at englishpodcast.com. Where can people reach us by email, Reza?
If you're still a bit shy, a bit timid, and you'd prefer to write rather than speak, you could email either of us. You can find Craig at englishpodcast.com or me, belfastreza@gmail.com.
And for improving your grammar, vocabulary and your listening, we have courses on the Mansion Inglés website. Go to store.mansioningles.com mencioningles.net and you'll see a selection of courses that you can buy.
As usual, we'd like to thank all the people who are helping us by supporting the podcast through the Patreon scheme. That's Patreon. And the Patreon program is a way of donating money if you want. The minimum amount is only $1.20 approximately. The 20 is to cover value added tax, VAT, that has to be paid. And by paying that $1.20, you get instant access as a way of saying thank you. You get instant access to recent audio transcriptions so you can see all the words of the podcast. If you're interested, go to www.patreon.com/inglespodcast.
And we don't have time to thank every Patreon supporter here on this podcast, but we do want to thank people who have joined us recently this month. So huge thanks to our latest sponsors, Fernando Figliolo, and I apologize if I've mispronounced your surname, Fernando. Ignacio, thank you. Juan Rios, thank you very much. Miguel, and someone who has remained anonymous who, along with Miguel, is supporting us for more than the minimum $1.20 amount. Thank you very much to all of our lovely Patreon supporters. What's next week, Reza?
Next week's episode is all about changing word stress on verbs and nouns.
We're looking forward to seeing you again next week. Until then, thank you for listening this week. It's goodbye from me.
And it's goodbye from me.
The music in this podcast is by Pits. The track is called See You Later.